This is not an official podcast of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, NSDAR, and does not necessarily represent the position of the NSDAR. This interview is being conducted for the Daughter Dialogues Oral History Project. The interviewer is Risha Rainey. The narrator is Del Jupiter. Del, would you please give me your full name?
Dale Egan Jupiter. I'm 96 years old, and I'm the last surviving member of my family. I grew up in Pensacola, Florida. There were only two of us, me and my brother. I'm the older child, and we lived across the street from my grandparents. And we had a very good time in spite of segregation. My father was a manager of a millionaire's estate. And although we lived in the city, we had free run of it when the Yankees weren't there. And that's where Mother gave all our picnics. I remember July the 4th, we would gather and we would have 2 or 3 of my friends, and Daddy would get up early and go fishing. The state overlooked the bayou, and he would go fishing, and then he'd come back with all the fish and fry it outdoors over a charcoal bucket. And Mother had potato salad, and then she made ice cream. And the way Mother did, the girls she didn't allow girls and boys to go swimming together. So the girls would go swimming once, and then the boys would go swimming. And there's a caretaker's cottage, and then that was sort of our headquarters. But people that other work on the estate lived in the cottage. But after a new man bought the estate from Delaware. He had married into the DuPont family. And then he thought decided he need but one person on the estate. Daddy had to make a choice, either him or Mr. Minor. So I suggested we live out there because I loved that estate. I loved the country. It was surrounded by woods. I would go hunting with my dad, and my brother and I, we would both go fishing with Daddy. We would put on hip-hop boots. And in those days, Daddy made his own nets to catch fish. And we'd walk along the shore. He'd throw his net out in the water and come up with a net full of fish. And Mother would fry it for supper. And we always walked to school. We lived in town. We walked to school. Elementary school wasn't far, but got in high school, we had to walk 3 miles. In the wintertime, we skated to school because we read above a lot of books for us to read. And I remember reading Hans Brink and the Silver Skates. Was set in Holland. He always skated to school on the ice. So we got roller skates. We always skated to school in the wintertime. And we had a friend. We stopped by her house on Sunday. She was a member of our church, and pick her up. And she would skate to Sunday school with us. She's still alive, and I tell her about that. She said, yes, I remember very well all of us skating to school and to Sunday school on Sunday. And that's about it. My grandfather had a horse and wagon, and the horse was named Charlie Boy. And he would go out in the country to the dairy farms and collect cow fertilizer and sell it and sack it up to the wealthy white women at home. And when he would bring it in, Daddy had made a screen, and we would pulverize the fertilizer on the screen for Daddy Palmer. So they had a yard full of pecan trees in the wintertime. They'd shake the trees, and we'd collect the pecans. So I thought we had a nice, enjoyable childhood.
How about your mother? Did she work as well?
Mother taught school before she married. And in her day, once you finished the 8th grade, if you exam, the black teachers, if they made a second, they could get a job teaching. And she taught school 17 years before she married, and 5 years after she married. After that, Daddy wanted to stay home with the children, with us. But most of her friends who started off with her, they would go to school every summer, either Tuskegee or Mary McLeod Bethune, and get credits until they got their A.B. degrees. Now, you could teach, when I was growing up, you could teach in an elementary school without a college degree. But high school teachers had to have a college degree. And I remember my mother's sister going off every summer. My grandmother said, I'd be glad when Maud gets her degree. And Maud finally got her degree. Sometimes she went to Tuskegee And sometimes, but she got a degree from Mary Bethune in Detroit, in Daytona Beach, Florida. My father he was sort of a jack of all trades, manager of the estate, but it wasn't, well, when he was there working by himself, he would start on Monday mowing the grass of the estate. It would take him a week to do it. In the wintertime, he would start raking leaves on Monday. It would take him a week to rake up all the leaves on the estate. And he would have to weed the flower beds. And in the summer when my brother was out, he would help him. And I would hear him tell my brother, when you get up, you want to go to college and get a degree and work for yourself and not work for anybody, so you won't be on your hands and knees pulling weeds out of flower bed. And my father hadn't been any further than the third grade. Why? Because, see, he was born 1887 and education wasn't available, and he had brothers. One brother made his living digging wells, and he did quite well because I guess back in that time everybody didn't have city water, and he was kept busy every day. He had a truck with a whole lot of pipes on it, and he'd go out every day and dig artesian wells for folk. The younger brother, I think, worked at the Navy Yard, and I remember them buying new cars every year, because when Daddy bought a car, he bought the first Ford station wagon that came out. And Mother sold, it was in about 1932, and Mother sold it in 53 after he died, so we kept it all that time.
Where was your father from?
Pensacola, Florida. He was born in Florida, not in Escambia County. He was born in Escambia County, but his older sisters and brothers were born in the adjoining county, Santa Rosa, where his mother was from originally. Now, his mother's from that Kelka line that had the Revolutionary War Ancestor. She married a Kelka, and his mother did. But his mother was freeborn also, and I found her baptismal records. My mother was born in Pensacola and lived on that same street from the time she was 9 years old. I have the deed records where her parents bought that 3 lots in 1893. They married in 1885, and my mother's mother was 13 years old when she married, and she had 13 children, but only 4 lived to be adults. In those days, I used to look at the birth and death records from Pensacola, and I feel so sorry for my grandmother and all the other women. A baby would be born dead, it'd be born live an hour, be born live a day, and then that was it. I guess, sanitation and proper eating and all of that, had something to do with it.
What do you know about your mother's parents?
Nan's father was supposed to have been a full-blooded Indian, but I haven't found that to be true. I think, how family stories get mixed up, and it's probably his mother was a full-blood Indian, because my grandmother looked very much like an Indian. And Daddy Palmer came from Alabama too, so did Nan. They were from the same county, but they didn't know each other when they were living in Conecuh County. But Daddy Palmer was 2 years older than Nan. Somehow or another, they met up in Pensacola and married. Nan's parents, you talk about Nan's parents. Her mother was born into slavery, and I know her parents' name. Her parents were Dilson and Dan Taylor. But Nan's mother died in 1885, I think about a month or so before my mother was born. And she died with dropsy. Dropsy was a common disease. I remember people growing up, I hear a lot of people dying with dropsy. That's the same thing as kidney disease now, but they have dialysis.
Did she ever talk about any stories from slavery?
No, they never talked about it. And I don't know why. And I wish I had asked more questions, because the mother lived out when my grandparents moved out in the neighborhood, it was country. I don't know where mother went to school. I guess I understand a school was started in a church near where they live, named Spencer Bibbs. It was named after a hack driver, Spencer Bibbs. He was interested in education. So there was an elementary school that was built, and I attended Spencer Bibbs School, and that school is still standing today.
Did you have an opportunity to take up any hobbies over the course of your life?
When I was a child growing up, well, in those days we didn't have television. Mother taught me how to embroider, and I knitted and crocheted too. And I went to college. I carried a couple of sweaters that I had knitted.
We share the same alma mater, Spelman College, which is an all-female, historically Black college in Atlanta, Georgia. Back in the 1940s, when you were attending Spelman, it was a very traditional women's school. Please tell me about your experience.
Well, my daddy brought me to Spelman. He and my brother drove me up to Spelman. I was 16 years old. He borrowed his old brother's car. Families helped each other out then. I had a second cousin. We were high school classmates, and Daddy's younger brother drove her and her mother to Howard University for her to attend there. But anyway, I came to Spelman at 16, and we saw the campus, and they parked me there and went back home, and I finished Spelman. There was a young lady that met me at Rockefeller because that's where Daddy stopped first, and she walked with me over to Morehouse South where I stayed as a freshman. My sophomore year, we stayed in Packard. I had more fun in there because they call sophomores wise and foolish. So we call ourselves morons. In my junior year, I was in Ancestor Strong. That was a small dormitory. And we called ourselves the Biffle Sisters, Biffle Phi Biffle Sorority. I understand that a lot of girls in Ancestor Strong now, after we did, they carried that sorority forward. It was just a little private thing that we called ourselves, Biffle Phi Biffle.
Across the street from Spelman was the all-male school Morehouse College. Did you enjoy spending time with the men of Morehouse?
During the war, World War II, I remember they all marched off to war in early 1942. And when I first went to Spelman, they always gave dances in the dormitory. And then they'd have a formal dance maybe twice a year in the dining room. But after that, since there were no men on campus across the street, we didn't have the dances anymore. And we missed that. And we had, the young men could come on campus between 4:30 and 5:30 calling hours. And you could have your company in the living room. 5:30 campus bell rang. The watchman was always at the gate to see that all the young men left the campus. Now, we were freshmen. We could use the Atlanta University Center Library in the daytime, but not in the evening. And we were sophomores. We could go there in day and evening whenever we needed to.
Did you have to wear dresses and gloves?
When we went to town, we had to have hat, bags, and gloves. But let me tell you this, and we weren't allowed to go to the downtown theaters. There was a Roxy Theater where Macy's is now. And we would go at Chadwick was a nursery school, and they had rooms upstairs where the older students would stay. Maybe older women would come back to college, and they stayed in Chadwick. So since the house mother would check us out, had hat bags and gloves, and we would get on the go to Chadwick and leave our hats and get on the trolley and go downtown. And that's where I saw the movie Jane Eyre in Casablanca. We only did it twice when I was there.
During that time, you weren't allowed to go downtown as a Spelman student, so you broke the rules a couple of times.
That was Spelman's rule then. And the older ones of us, we talk about how the kids dress now because they're more relaxed now. On Sundays, we dress for dinner. We dress for dinner on Sunday, but every evening after supper, you were assigned a table. They had 2 freshmen, 2 sophomores, 2 juniors, and 2 seniors. And the seniors served as hostess, and they would serve the dinner family style. The students that worked in the dining hall would come and put the plates on the table, the serving plates, and the seniors would serve us our plates. And you changed they changed every 6 weeks. So that's how everybody got to know everybody. You know, you had a freshman, sophomore, and a junior at a table.
Did you also have to wear dresses while you were on campus?
Yeah, we had to wear our socks, and seems to me on Saturday afternoon, you could wear pants if you were leaving the dorm going to another dormitory. We wore skirts and blouses and saddle Oxfords, black and white or brown and white saddle Oxfords. The shoe didn't matter the shoes, but that was the style back then, saddle Oxfords. And everybody would autograph each other's saddle Oxford.
What did you study while you were at Spelman College?
I was a biology major and minored in English. And I went to grad school over at Atlanta University biology, but I met my husband when I was doing my thesis, and that was it. And after we married, my first child was born. I received a letter from a friend of mine who's a librarian in California. And he told me, he said, you know, that's a nice profession for a woman. It's too bad you didn't waste your money, didn't finish your thesis. I said, I don't want to do no more chicken eggs. And he suggested I go to library school. And that worked out because he was a minister and we went around to various towns. The town had the biology teacher, but they always needed a librarian.
Did you and your husband have children?
We have 3 children. Mm-hmm.
Is your husband still living?
No, he died out in Houston as a result of injuries from an automobile accident.
What is your secret to longevity?
I don't know. I guess it's in the family. My mother's mother lived to 104. Mother died 3 months before her 97th birthday. My father's people lived, but not as late. His father lived to be 100, but nobody else in his family did. Maybe they died in their late 80s or whatever. Daddy died young. He was in his 60s. I think he had Alzheimer's.
Your Revolutionary War ancestor family name is Kelker, and that is on your father's side. Tell me more about your father's family.
His mother was freeborn. Her mother was born free one day from before she was born. And her mother was a slave. And according to mother's story, her mother had married an Indian named Gomez, this unknown slave woman who was born in Spain, and she was brought to Pensacola during Spanish rule. And she married this Indian named Gomez, and she had 2 daughters named Louise and Cecilia. And Gomez planned to free both of his daughters and planned to free the mother, but he dropped dead to old Catholic secretary before he had a chance to do so. But I haven't found Gomez's death. And Gomez wasn't an Indian, he was Portuguese. And so you have to do research to flesh out these family stories. And I did see the manumission record where it was in Spanish. I was visiting my son, he had a Hispanic friend, I got her to translate it. And the translation said that he had paid Ferdinand Christian 30 pesos to free this child, which his Negro slave woman was pregnant with. But then the document didn't say whether she was born or not, born dead or born alive. So I had to do more research, and I found about 20 years later, after that first original deed, Ferdinand Christian, who was the owner of Augustina, Cecilia's mother, he said he hadn't kept his promise. He was keeping his promise, and he did receive 30 pesos from Juan Gomez to free the child, which his slave Augustina was pregnant with. And that child was born Cecilia Gomez, and she married a free man of color named John Kelker. And it named all the children that they had at that point. So that was very exciting. I used to do a lot of my research in the family history. So when I saw that document, I just ran around hooking everybody. I found them. And the Gomez planned to free the mother, but he died before he could do so, but he freed his daughters. But I didn't find the evidence of the other daughter, Louise, being freed. I'll tell you about that a little later. But anyway, Cecilia grew up to be a beautiful girl, and she married this free man of color, John Kelker, who was a Dutch Baptist preacher, and they had several children. Then Elizabeth, when she grew up, she married this man, Alex Egan from Maryland. And they married and had several children. And then my daddy was one of them. And then my daddy married my mother. And that's where I came in.
How did you become interested in researching your family history?
Well, I'd heard all these stories about how our lineage went back to the days of the Spaniards, but I didn't pay any attention to it then. But Mother was visiting us in Houston one year, and I said, Mother, you need to write all these stories down because we are gone. When you're gone, we won't know anything. Because we heard a lot of stories about a Spanish pirate, and I know my daddy used to go out and hunt for the gold. It was it was told that when this pirate died, before his death, he asked his sons to put him in a wheelbarrow so he could show them where his gold was buried. But on the way there, he died before they could get to where the gold was buried. And my daddy made a divining rod, and he and one of his brothers would go out somewhere in the woods near the bayou and search for this gold. And my brother went with him one night and said they were by a tree digging. And a little green man came out the hole. And when John told me that, I was in tears. I don't guess that was true, but he was just trying to scare me. My mother didn't like it because he thought she would believe in education. He spent money on this metal detector to find this gold. They never found the gold. And then she gives a story about her side, too. And the great-great-grandmother was named Dilson. Great-great-grandfather was named Dan Taylor. And they had several children. And their daughter, Rena, married an Indian named Jefferson Drake. And Jefferson Drake and Rena had 3 children. And one of them was my grandmother, Nan, and Nan married Robert Palmer. Those are my grandparents and their children. And Nan and Robert had my mother Hattie, and Hattie married John Egan, and John and Hattie had 2 children. So that's the oral tradition she gave us. And so Mother wrote that in a letter to me, and I saved it. And I had a cousin that had heard that I knew all the family history, and she kept worrying me about it. And I just decided to pull that story out and look at it. And I had taken a class at Atlanta University under Dr. Horace Mann Bond called The Foundations of Education. And he said blacks need to know their family history because family history was the foundation of education in the family. So I did a little research then. But then I pulled out Mother's story, and I had read the book Somerset Homecoming, and that lady had told how she done her research in North Carolina. So I said, well, I can do that too. So I started looking, and someone suggested I go to the Family History Library. And at that time, they had microfiche, and all of the Florida state marriages were on microfiche. And I found Cecilia Gomez and John Kelker and their marriage. But when I first looked, I didn't see it. I looked under Kelker. Then I went back the next week, I looked under Gomez and I saw it. And what happened, the transcriber had misspelled the Kelker and put it as a T. And so I wrote the folks at the Family History Center in Utah, Salt Lake City, and they did correct that. So that's how my research started.
Did you ever travel out to the Family History Center in Utah?
No, I've never been there. I didn't do anything but rent microfilms. But, you could get the microfilms and find records that made. I went to New Orleans a lot because Augustina, I thought I had to go back to Spain to look for Augustina because Mother said she was born in Spain, but she was born in Spanish Louisiana. I never found her baptismal record. But New Orleans has very good notarial archives, and all the notarial records have been filmed. And researching those, I found Augustina's mother, Esther. And it mentioned that Esther when she was about 12 years old, her mistress had purchased her from her mother. That was in 1783. And then later on, I found a baptismal record for Esther. She was born in 1773, and it named her mother Monique. So I was excited over that. And then what happened, I found a document. That was a document I found that sale that Victoria Lassase had bought Esther from her mother. Now, Victoria Lassase had married a Spaniard from the province of Asturias in northern Spain. When I looked on the map and saw where Asturias was, it was in the very tip of northern Spain. I said, I wonder how in the world they get to Pensacola by ship. But they all did. And so he was a mayor of Pensacola. And when he died, I was able to find his probate records, but I found them in a court case. Now, you have to look at so much. One thing, Pensacola, New Orleans, and Mobile are very good for genealogical research because the Spanish and the French used notaries. They would do anything, sell a slave. It was always in the notarial records. But Pensacola has a lot of surviving court cases. And I was able to find that court case, which was at the Florida State Archives. And I sent them $50 for a copy of it. It was a whole lot of pages. And after Joseph Noriega died, Victoria had married another man, Peter Alba. And the family claimed that he tried to poison her because he wanted her property. But what made me have the connection to Augustina, the Genealogical Society in Pensacola one year had me to come and speak to them. And I had just about finished all my research then. And they asked me, well, before I ended my lecture, I said I have a favorite slave. And I always talked about Matilda because I could find more about Matilda than I could Augustina, my great-grandmother. And so my great-great-grandmother. So when I finished the lecture, a lady came up and said, I have information on Matilda. And she sent me this court case in Pensacola when Matilda had witnessed a murder when she was a child. And in 1881, she came back to Pensacola from Mobile. And she testified in court who she was. And she said, my mistress was old Madame Noriega. And she was born in New Orleans. I was born in New Orleans. And she told a lady how she used to, when she was growing up a child in Pensacola for rest and relaxation, she would play with the Cairo boy, to go to the Cairo's house and play with his son. And she had witnessed this murder as a child. And she said, and when I finish this, I'm going back to Mobile. I'm not staying here. And I can imagine this old woman get testified, say, no, I'm not going back. I'm not staying. I'm going back to Mobile. She had been inherited by a niece of Victoria Lassase. And what this niece did, she married a lawyer and they relocated to Mobile. And I found Matilda in the Freedman Savings Bank records. And she told who her children were. And she had a son named Emmanuel. His father was free, and that son was freeborn also. And I was able to find descendants of that family. And it's from this other court case that I was able to ascertain that Augustina was also Esther's daughter.
What are your life's greatest accomplishments, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know. It took me about 20 years on my research. I did a book on my family history, but it wasn't finished with my book. I've done 3 articles in the National Genealogical Society Quarterly. One won the Quarterly Award for Excellence. And that article was a lead article in the journal that year. It was about 30 pages long. And I think the title of that article is From Augustina to Esther. And it has a subtitle. I've forgotten something about.
Is it analyzing a slave household for child-parent relationships?
Yeah, that's what it is. That's the subtitle. It took me a long time to find Augustina. And then I had done a whole lot of other research on all the slave in the Noriega household. And that was included because from after I'd done one article, from time to time I would send to Elizabeth Mills. She was the editor then. I said, "Look what I found," because I could follow. I followed Matilda quite a bit because after she moved to Mobile, she would come back and forth to Pensacola on a boat with her master. And when I would go every summer to D.C. to visit my son, I always entered the National Archives. And as you know, they have a book called Research in the National Archives. And I would just get that book and pour through it and decided what I need to look at to help me with my research. And they had some shipping records. And one of the records had to do with Pensacola, Mobile, and I looked at that. And that gave me, I could see slave names in that were Noriega slaves. And that was my mission, to find Noriega slave descendants. I wanted to follow them up. And what happened, my daughter married a fellow from Boston, but the family's not original from Boston, but he's a Noriega slave descendant. He's deceased now. And that article, some white families have found me. And they are white. And if that was a mulatto slave woman that they are descended of. So that they are Noriega slave descendants too.
You mentioned that you went to Mobile for a Bible exhibit. Tell me more about what you did while you were there.
And there was a white fellow who used to help me with my research. I would ask him to look up stuff for me. And I told him I wanted to meet the other Noriega slave descendants there who were living in Mobile. We met at the historic Magnolia Cemetery. And one of them was a Creole, one was Filipina, and one family was white. And they didn't know, the white family didn't know they had a black ancestor till this person died. And that's when it was noted. And we visited the various grave sites for all the families, the three families. And I asked them, had they ever been told these stories that I knew in Pensacola, but they didn't, because Matilda had raised the fellow that was a Creole. Matilda had raised his father. And he remembers his father talking about this old woman who had reared him because his mother had died early. And Matilda died 101, and she remained a Catholic all her life. She had, she'd been owned by a Catholic family. I remember going to the National Geological Society quarter one year, and I went into one session called Spanish Research. And so the instructor asked us different ones of why were we there. I said, well, I have a Portuguese ancestor. And he said, I figured that. And I said, well, how did you figure that? What made you figure that,
What did he say?
He didn't say anything.
How did you find out that your ancestor contributed to the American Revolution?
Well, in doing my research, I told you we always heard these family stories about this pirate and buried gold. And John Kelvin, mother story, my great-grandfather John Kelvin was supposed to have been a Dutch. So I thought I'd have to go to Holland. But somehow or another in research, I found out the Dutch meant Pennsylvania Dutch. Mother said it was a Black Baptist preacher. And I have a cousin, we got in an argument. My father's grandfather was a white, full-blooded white man. I told him, I said, you go find your full-blooded white man.
Why was that an argument?
Well, see, I said it was a free man of color, and I had won an award. I tell you, it was the Florida Pioneer Descendant Society. I'm a member of that society. When I was at the Georgia Archives, somehow or another I stumbled upon that. And I said, I believe I could do that. And I submitted all my papers, and I was the first African American to become a member of that society. Your ancestors had to be living in Florida before it became a state in 1885. And John Kelker was there. He was head of household in 1830. my great grandfather. All this on my father's side. And then he was a son of this Jacob Kelker, who had come down from Pennsylvania. His father, Anthony, was a patriot, Revolutionary War patriot. Anthony Kelker. Now, Anthony was migrated to America with his father, Henry. And when they first came to America, the name was spelled Kelliker, Kellelliker. But then it became Kelker somehow or another, I don't know how. But Jacob started wandering, and he stopped in several places on the way south. He was in Virginia and was in Nashville, Tennessee, and New Orleans and Mobile, and ended up in Pensacola, and then in their adjoining county. And he had a land grant from the U.S. government, 640 acres off from Escambia Bay. And there's a creek in Santa Rosa County with the name Jacobs Creek on it. And he had received 640 acres of land. He was granted that by Congress because he had lived on this land and cultivated it when the Spanish were here in Pensacola.
Do you know more about your Revolutionary War Patriots service?
He was a wagoner. I looked him up, and I went to Lebanon, Pennsylvania, where they settled, and saw the churchyard where he and his wife are buried. And the church is still standing that they went to. It's a Reformed church.
Del, you have received recognition for the work that you have done tracing your ancestry back to before the state of Florida became a U.S. territory in 1821. Tell me about some of that recognition.
When Pensacola had that 350th anniversary, I had submitted, you had to have documented your family back to the time before Andrew Jackson came in 1821. That's when Florida became a territory. And I had 3 ancestors. One was Juan Gomez, the Portuguese. And I had Jacob Kelker, and then Esther Noriega. Esther's my 3rd great-grandmother, and she was Victoria Lassasse's favorite slave. So I had a cousin. Her folk brought her down, and she was 101 years old the day she came to the hotel. And they had a big sign out there, "Happy Birthday, Vivian Kelper Shepherd." And then when we went to the ceremony, they had a ceremony at the Naval Yard. They had a play telling about the various periods of Florida history, how it was first with the Indians, and then you had the Spanish, and the French came along and chased the Spanish out. The Spanish came back and chased the French out, and the British were in for a while. And then, of course, the flag of the Confederate States of America. They had all the 5 flags represented. And that was interesting. We've all presented certificates with our ancestors' names on it. And my 1-year-old cousin, I got the certificate for Jacob too, but she was announced as the descendant of Jacob Kelker and received a certificate because she was a Kelker. My grandmother was a Kelker. And Vivian was on my grandmother's niece. Vivian's father and my grandmother were brother and sister.
How does it feel as a Black American descending from someone who fought for the independence of this country?
Well, I don't have special feelings about it. It was just a natural course of events. I tell you, it made me feel different because the Kelker family, they are mentioned in a book called, I forget, this book is called Early Surname. I found it in the library. Early Surnames in America. And they are just all over the place because they came here in 1743 before the Revolutionary War. They were the German-speaking Swiss, and that's why they were called Pennsylvania Dutch, Deutsh. And see, his mother's story in reference my great grandfather, he was Dutch. Meant he was that Dutch meant Pennsylvania Dutch.
Let's talk about the Daughters of the American Revolution. What got you interested in joining the DAR?
Well, when I was doing research, I see various things, and I guess I saw them. I believe I can do that. I did that. And I looked up them in the telephone directory and called and told the lady answered. I left a message. She called me back. I told I was interested in becoming a member, and she told me I could, and maybe I'd be interested in joining the national instead of the local. So that's what I did at first, but after a year, I affiliated with the local chapter.
Why did you join the DAR?
Because I could. I just thought I tried and did,
You mentioned to me that you joined the DAR in 1991. What made you eventually want to join a chapter in the state of Georgia?
They let me I attended the local chapter meetings, and then I decided that I wanted to affiliate with the local chapter and be a part of it. The following year, and I joined the local chapter. Well, I don't know. I just thought I should have, They were nice, and after I think I stayed in about 10 years, I was the secretary for 1 year, secretary of the chapter, and I had a friend to join too, and that was Mildred Walton, but she's deceased now. She joined about 2 years after I did. So there were two of us in that chapter.
Tell me about your new member welcome ceremony.
But they never did it, and they never did it for Mildred either. Everybody else had a welcome ceremony, but two of us didn't. We had luncheon. We always had a luncheon meeting. They did find me later on. Somebody found me, and I went back for about a year.
Why did you want to take a leadership role in your chapter? As secretary, that is a chapter officer position.
Yeah, I know. Well, they wanted me to be secretary. That's how I ended up doing it. And they wanted Mildred, the other person, they wanted her to be regent, but she didn't want that responsibility. And then, see, we had an old building that you had to see after also at that time, but they don't have it anymore because it was condemned.
So you were saying that the chapter asked an African American, that would be Mildred, your friend, to be regent, which is the leader of the chapter.
So one time I remember they were having something at the state, near the state capitol. The DR did. And the DR didn't have it, but they were going. They wanted me and Mildred to attend. But we didn't want anybody to know that we were part of the DR. Mildred especially didn't want anybody to know.
Why didn't you want anybody to know?
Well, I didn't want it to be public that I was a member,
Why would you want to keep that from other people?
Well, they would question you, why would you want to do that and all of that, so.
Did you ever tell your family?
Yes, they knew it. Mm-hmm.
Did any of your other family members join the DAR?
No, some of my male relatives, male cousins have joined the SAR. I had a cousin in Illinois. He just took my book to the SAR, and they looked at the book, and that was it. He was in.
SAR meaning the Sons of the American Revolution.
You haven't seen, all he had to do was bring himself. I didn't put living people in the book, but I did so many generations that if you were kin to me, if you were kin to those folk, you would knew you were kin, kin to me. So my cousin had to probably do 2 generations. His great grandmother's in the book. So he had to document his grandmother's marriage, and his mother's marriage, and his marriage.